go ahead. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and do that. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank y'all so much for the kind words. And we're on YouTube. Hey there, students. Tom Richey here, and we are here for another night of APUSH review. I'm reminding everyone that I'm going to be here at 8 p.m. for the duration. It is currently Tuesday night, and I will be here Wednesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. Also, we're going to be doing occasional TikToks and that sort of thing. So remember, at Tom Richey on TikTok, at Tom Richey on Instagram as well, if you're there. And I will be doing occasional shout outs during this thing. Now, remember, if you're on the Crowdcast, and anybody's welcome to join us there. If you're on YouTube, crowdcast.io/Tom Richey. So we'll go ahead and remember, ask your questions. Okay, there's the Q&A tab, and you can ask questions and you can upvote questions that you like. So this is something that helps me to know what we're wanting. Now, we've got a Unit 4 emphasis tonight, 1800 to 1848, this period of the Jeffersonian Republic and the Age of Jackson. Now, I've got a unit guide. If you will type in APUSH Unit 4 Review Guide Tom Richey, or you can just look in the chat. I'm going to put this in the chat in Crowdcast, and I believe I've got it pinned on the chat. So thank you so much, everybody who is here on both Crowdcast and YouTube. We're very glad to see, very glad to see y'all there. So going from there, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead. Oh, no, we are not failing, Adrian. We are not failing. So let's go ahead and get started with this. So what I'm going to pull up here is King Andrew I. Now, we can go back and look at Jefferson, but since somebody, we were using that, that king title, and we want to remember, now it's interesting that today, when someone wants to insult somebody politically, they'll call them a communist or a fascist or a Nazi or something like that. But remember, in the 1830s, when Jackson was president, we all getting 500s, Ray. That's right. We about to cook, Julia. That is right. And so when Jackson was president, there were no communists. There were no Nazis. So what do you call somebody that you don't like politically, okay? And so you call them a king. In fact, the Whig Party, like where did the Whig, WHIG. Now, we got to remember that. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, if you go through my TikTok, you'll see me doing my Whig Party Free, which is to the tune of Glorilla's FNF. Okay, I think we'll just leave it at that, right? So with that, let's go ahead and I'm going to pull up some things about the second two-party system. Okay, but the Whigs, they named themselves after a party that was popular in Britain, and so their point was there was this insinuation that Andrew Jackson was was behaving as a king. So let's go ahead and start off with the brass tacks, okay? As far as that goes, Ryan, what I think you should get is stop spamming the chat. Now, a couple of things, ladies and gentlemen. We just want to make sure that there are not, long things pasted. If you want to help, I know some people want to be helpful. Now, if Mr. Good's here, Mr. Good can do whatever he wants. But those of you who are students, if you want to get some kind of chat started in a Google Doc or something like that and invite people to it, great. But as far as putting like long messages in the chat, that's something that could get somebody kicked. Now, remember, now I won't always be monitoring the chat closely, but if I see, cyberbullying, anything like that, just remember, okay? So make sure that we are cooking, ladies and gentlemen. So with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put this on screen. We're going to take a look at the second two-party system, okay? The second two-party system, last night we were talking about the first two-party system, and before that, remember, I have linked this. If you go to Google and you just type in Tom Richey, APUSH Unit 4 Review Guide, it'll come up. Now, I've got one of these for Unit 3, Unit 4, Unit 5, and Unit 6. Do I have one for all the other units? Maybe next year. The goal is next year to have a full set of nine unit review guides. But for right now, I think it's better than nothing. So we've got one for Unit 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, what we're doing here is we see the era of Jefferson. We'll go backwards. I feel like starting with Jackson tonight, okay? So we've got, the era of Jefferson, America on the world stage, the market revolution, the politics of sectionalism, and the age of Jackson and Jacksonian democracy. Now, when I've made things, red and bold like this, these are terms that you would be very well to know. Now, again, we have a unit timeline that's got major events here. Remember, 1803 is a 2-for-1 date, Louisiana Purchase and Marbury v. Madison. And so going from there, ladies and gentlemen, let's just take a quick look at the second two-party system. So going from there, we will go ahead and get that started, the Democrats versus the Whigs. And so the leaders, now these parties have several leaders, but the two biggest figures in the second two-party system, which is going from about 1828 or so to 1852. So this is something that we have Henry Clay with the Whigs and Andrew Jackson with the Democrats. Now, as far as federalism, now remember the Federalist Party's done, and the Constitution has been ratified, so we've got Federalists, they're done. But federalism, this idea of how do we divide power between the central government, the federal government, and the state government. So we've got a federal government and we've got state governments. How do we divide that power? And so Henry Clay and the Whigs, they believed in a more nationalistic kind of view of the Constitution. And then Jackson was a states' rights guy. Okay, Jackson believed that the states should retain as many rights as possible. Now, you'll see some echoes of the old Jefferson versus Hamilton. Jackson definitely has a lot of Jeffersonian sympathies. Now, separation of power. That the Whigs support a strong Congress, whereas the Democrats, the Jacksonians, they support a strong presidency, okay, a strong presidency. And the Constitution, how are we going to interpret the Constitution? Thank you, Camilla, period N15, for the recent Instagram follow. The Constitution, that the Whigs are loose constructionists, and then the Democrats are strict constructionists. Now, remember what that means, same as it did with Jefferson and Hamilton, that strict construction means that, you know, what's in there is in there. Now, again, speaking of the Constitution, you ever thought what would happen if Tom Richey wrote a book? Well, he did. U.S. Constitution 101 is available on Amazon or wherever you buy books in, paper. And in the book form, it's available on ebook, and it's also available in audiobook with yours truly reading the book. So with that, now why is Henry Clay thinking about being a loose constructionist? Well, Henry Clay is the father of the American system: national bank, internal improvements, protective tariff. And so the American system is something that Henry Clay devised after the War of 1812 to try to create an independent economy in the United States, an economy that wouldn't be dependent on Europe, an American economy, an American system. Now, I want to remember here, we want to remember that I've got an American system song that we can definitely hear at some point during tonight's broadcast if y'all want. So I'm just going to make sure I've got my guitar there just in case we want to hear that. So when it comes to moral reform, remember, this is the era of the antebellum reform movements, abolitionism, temperance, women's rights, all directly or indirectly, coming from this, the Second Great Awakening and the democratic political culture. Now, remember, when we talk about democracy, we're talking about this universal white male suffrage. When we talk about Jacksonian democracy, that we've moved away from this system, stay hydrated, kids, from this system where somebody had to own property in order to vote, and now they just have to be an adult white male citizen. And so, with that, we see that the Whigs tend to generally be more supportive of the antebellum moral reform movements, the Democrats less so. The economy. Henry Clay wants direct federal support for economic development. Now, let's think about why Henry Clay is thinking along these lines, okay? Why is he thinking along these lines? Loose construction. Well, loose construction of the Constitution allows the federal government to have some powers that are not necessarily in there, okay? Whereas Jackson is more of a laissez-faire guy. The Whigs have their strongest support in the Northeast, similar to the Federalist Party, but they also have some support in the West, specifically in Tennessee and Kentucky. And then Jackson's party, the farther south, the farther west you go, but they also have some support in the Northeast. Jackson, this is still a time where you need Pennsylvania and New York to win. So Henry Clay's American system, again, we nip it, okay? Nip it. National bank, internal improvements, and protective tariff. Now, with Henry Clay's nationalistic view, loose constructionism, and his support for economic development and an independent economy. Oh, yeah. Sectional support. Just kind of seeing here, just as a note, the Democratic Party is definitely the stronger party this time, as you can see on the map. You go into the Trans-Mississippi, and the Wigs don't do that well at all. But with that, the American system, national bank, internal improvements, and protective tariff. That the Wigs are for all three. Now, Jackson, definitely not a big fan of the national bank, not a big fan of internal improvement. So Jackson vetoed the bank bill that Henry Clay thought, you know what, we're going to try to recharter the bank 4 years early. Jackson was like, no, you're not. I'm going to veto that sucker. And then with internal improvements, this is the funniest story, I think, is when Henry Clay gets a bill passed through Congress to get federal funding for the Maysville Road. Now, the Maysville Road was a road that was going to connect Lexington, Kentucky to Maysville, Kentucky. And it gets to Andrew Jackson's desk. He's like, what? We're connecting Henry Clay's hometown of Lexington, Kentucky with Maysville, Kentucky on the Ohio River. And now Clay says, well, in the language of loose construction, well, this helps interstate commerce because it's something that, that ties Lexington to the Ohio River, and it'll increase interstate commerce. Jackson, strict construction. He's like, bruh, this is all in one state, okay? So it goes to, and that's something I address in my book, that, there are different ways of interpreting the Commerce Clause. You can have a stricter or a loose, expansive or more of a limited view of the Commerce Clause. Now, the protective tariff, Jackson's party has factions. That the North, in Democrats in Pennsylvania and New York and New Jersey, they support the tariff because, of course, the Northeast during this time is industrializing, is building factories. We see the Lowell Mills in Massachusetts. If we go back to the if we go back over here, we'll see the Lowell Mills, the market revolution, right? And so Massachusetts is starting these mills in Lowell where, these young unmarried women are working in these mills and bringing home a bit of money. And so, we also have the Eli Whitney's cotton gin in the South, John Deere's steel plow in the old Northwest, what we think about today as the Midwest, okay? So as far as that goes, now sometimes I'll just walk in my classroom like, who invented the steel plow? John Deere, okay? They're supposed to know that, okay? Who wrote the Federalist Papers? James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay. Who invented the steel plow? John Deere. Okay, so just just as a note here, it's just I make the key terms bolded here to make it easy for you to see what is the most important stuff here if we were gonna, if we're gonna cram Unit 4 and turn it into a 2-pager. Okay. Now, as far as what the parties may have in common, and I need to finish this part before I make a formal lecture for YouTube, but both major parties definitely oppose nullification, okay? And also, both major parties, the Whigs, maybe at first a little bit, less excitedly, but both took part in the popular campaigning, okay? Jefferson and Washington and Madison, they ran for office. They presented themselves as candidates for office, but they didn't go around campaigning in the same way that we think of today. That's part of democratic culture. So with that, thank you, Felix _2 and Zoha F1 for the Instagram follows, and Haley Abel __. Thank you very much. Now, I've also recently, posted a picture of Harambe. Remember, rumor has it that double tapping a picture of Harambe will raise your AP score by 2 points. Okay, now that's just a rumor. What do I know? Okay, so I can't verify that. So going from that, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at a piece of Whiggish propaganda that is often seen on exams and in classrooms and that sort of thing. That we see Andrew Jackson, and he's dressed up like a king. Now remember that when we see king to say king today, people were trying to king me on the way in, and I was like, wait, we got a Republican form of government here, and so Andrew Jackson, they're presenting him like a king because they didn't have communists and they didn't have fascists and Nazis. And so they thought, what's the worst thing we can portray him as a king? Now, he's using the veto power. Andrew Jackson vetoed more pieces of legislation than the 6 presidents before him combined. Now, this goes along with the Democrats' belief in a strong presidency. And the veto power, again, it's in the Constitution, perfectly constitutional, and there's no limit on the president's veto power other than the ability of Congress by 2/3 of each house to override it. Now, no vetoes were overridden until John Tyler's presidency. But Andrew Jackson, all of his vetoes stood. And so the Whigs said, well, you're being a king. Well, Jackson said, well, I'm just vetoing unconstitutional legislation. So we want to understand POV and that, like point of view analysis and purpose analysis. So when we think about this being a Whiggish cartoon, we don't look at this and say Andrew Jackson governed like a king. We see him dressed as a king, but it's as an insult. His veto power. Now, the thing is, Democrats would have said he's vetoing unconstitutional legislation. King Andrew I, and the Whigs have him stepping on the Constitution. They have him stepping on internal improvements, the National Bank. Remember, National Bank, internal improvements, protective tariff. What are internal improvements? Roads, bridges, canals. So they've got him standing on this stuff. Now, Andrew Jackson would say that he's upholding the Constitution by vetoing internal improvements in the U.S. Bank, because it never says in the Constitution that the federal government can charter a bank or build, pay for roads, bridges, canals in the state. So it's an interesting thing, because we see here that President Jackson, portrayed like a king, the veto power is a check on the power of Congress. And one thing that's really interesting is this is a time where it's getting to where, well, maybe the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution, and the Supreme Court in McCulloch v. Maryland, remember, and that's something I've got up here. One thing we want to note about the period of the Jeffersonians, that the Federalist Party, they lost control of the political branches and they never get them back again. But in McCulloch v. Maryland, Chief Justice John Marshall upheld the constitutionality of the Second Bank of the United States. And this is where Andrew Jackson said something I find really compelling. He said, it's every American's job to interpret the Constitution. It's not just the Supreme Court's job. Jackson says, you know what? The Supreme Court says that the state of Maryland can't tax the Bank of the United States. Jackson says, I don't see anything in the Constitution that says that a state government can't tax a business, a for-profit business that's operating within its state. So again, Jackson's enemies saw him as a king, but Jackson and his, and his own people saw him as someone who was defending the Constitution. Now, what do we want to hear first? Do we want to hear Whig Party Free, the rap, or do we want to hear the American System song? I'm open to either one. Whig Party Free, American System. What do we want to hear, ladies and gentlemen? Put the fries. Oh, my Lord. Put the fries in the bag. Womp, womp. All right. So as far as that goes, Gabriel, I give it a little time at the beginning for questions to kind of build up and get up votes. So, yes, I do. I do that. And, we do some things. Okay, so we've got, let me go ahead and do a poll in the crowdcast, which song first. Okay, so I'm just going to say here, WPF, and then, American System. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and put that up, let that sit, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the most popular question right now. Okay, last minute cramming. What I always tell people to do is find something. What you want to find for your cram things is get your, whatever prep book you're using, that sort of thing, and look for stuff that you find interesting that maybe it's been a long time or your teacher skipped. I don't recommend cramming with stuff that bores you. Okay. And also you don't want to, oh, you know what? There's a, let's see here. Do we see any hands raised? I tell you what, we're going to go ahead and I've got somebody wanting to come on stage, and let's see if we can go ahead and make that happen there. All right, Alexander, when I'm finished answering this question, we'll go ahead and get you on stage here, buddy. And so with that, I don't think you should study stuff that you think is boring because it's going to put you to sleep. And you shouldn't study stuff that you're all good with. Like, for example, all of you Hamilton musical people, like, you shouldn't be studying about, oh, I'm just going to study about Alexander Hamilton. Like, is there actually somebody here? I don't know. Let's see. Alexander, can you?
I just had a couple of questions.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, ask one of them. Okay. So let's see. You can ask one.
How did the Jacksonian democracy expanded voting rights?
Okay, Jacksonian democracy expanded voting rights because it got rid of the old, like, and they did this state by state and starting with the Western states. Because remember, people move to the Western states because they are, they're moving to Western states not because they're rich, but because they don't really have, anything. And so Andrew Jackson, self-made man, born in a cabin somewhere. We don't even know exactly where Andrew Jackson was born. They speculate somewhere in South Carolina near the Tennessee border. But Andrew Jackson, is, somebody who's a self-made man. And so the idea that we see here is that the common man who doesn't own property has just as much right to have a say in his government as the person who is a person of property. Now, Alexander Hamilton, he would throw up, at hearing something like that. Jefferson would probably be a little uncomfortable with that. Jefferson believed in eventually maybe we can have a democracy once everybody's educated. But, that's the thing about the Jacksonians. We see that they are, they are saying that, look, the common man who doesn't own any property, he's just as entitled to to have a say in his government as the person who's educated his property owner. So with that, last minute cramming. Also, the other thing is pick things you're interested in, but you don't know a lot about, or that your teacher skipped. Like, for example, if your teacher didn't get to Unit 8 and 9, cram Unit 8 and 9. And then maybe go back, do a little 1 and 2, maybe. But as far as that goes, what did your teacher skip? What are you interested in that maybe you want to brush up on? But the stuff that you either have very low interest, because that's cramming, that's you don't need to go to sleep while you're cramming, or you have very high knowledge, stay away from that stuff. Okay. So that's what I would recommend there. And we're talking about last minute cramming. And again, I do think that the unit guides I've made for 3, 4, 5, and 6, I think that those guides, like, I get down to the brass tacks. You want to stay away from like minutia and stuff like that. So with that, let's go ahead, and we've got a question about Polk's presidency and the gold rush. So James K. Polk, the main thing here, 1844, it starts that, oh, you know what, you got me. That's technically the, the Unit 5, but let's go ahead and do it. So Polk, James K. Polk was elected in 1844 on an expansionist ticket. Now, in the 1830s, when the United States had a little more of a cautious and kind of leftover aristocratic political culture, when Texas when they seceded from Mexico and they wanted to be annexed in the United States, no dice. That Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, they took a hard pass on Texas coming into the Union, because when we think about the Monroe Doctrine, we're recognizing the validity of the governments of Mexico and Colombia and Chile. And that wouldn't really be good under the Monroe Doctrine if we were, absorbing a secessionist entity from our neighbor Mexico, whose, existence we recognized. So as far as that goes, Polk comes in, though, in 1844. Polk runs against Henry Clay. And this is an interesting example of, like, Henry Clay has a lot more name recognition. People generally liked him. But Polk was what they call a dark horse. Nobody really knew who he was, but he was on the right side of the issues. Okay, the Democratic Party in 1844 said, we are unequivocally for the annexation of Texas and the westward expansion and getting out of, so basically the idea that we are unequivocally for manifest destiny, okay, that we want to annex Texas, we want to settle the Oregon thing. They of course claimed they wanted to, take the whole thing, and they didn't, but still, it was an expansionist kind of thing. Now, Henry Clay, the national mood was saying annex Texas, because again, that's for educated people to worry about, okay? When you think about like, what are the intricacies of annexing Texas and how does that deal with like international relations? Educated people think about those things. Uneducated, unproperty people, they're like, Texas wants to come in. Why aren't we letting them in? Okay, why isn't that happening? And so Polk runs on that ticket. Polk is on the side of the issues that the majority of American voters care about. So Clay takes a non-position, okay? And that's never a good thing to do when you're running for president, is to not be clear about your position on the issues of the day. And so Clay, I mean, the popular vote, it was very close. Henry Clay was, someone who was well respected. But, if Clay had been on the right side of the Texas issue, now what I mean by the right side is, democracy. What's right? Majority rule, okay? That's the other part. So democracy says equality of all members of the political community that fall into categories that have the right to vote. And then the other part is majority rule. Whatever the majority wants, they get, okay? And so that's something that's kind of changing about our political culture. I would say Chimpanzini. Is that his real name? You imagine like his mom giving him a bottle and like, hey, little baby Chimpanzini, but, somehow I doubt it. But the gold rush, I would say the gold rush is probably not a major topic. Now watch that be the DBQ or something like that. But just from my experience, it's not something that I really have seen a lot of on the exam. So we're just going to pass on that one. So as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead. I tell you what, y'all want to run your own review. Y'all run, when y'all try to tell me how I'm going to run this review, I just delete those questions. Okay. When y'all want to say that in the chat, I'm like, hey, you know what? If it's doing better for you, I'm going to do what I feel like doing. And if that works for you, then that's great. Okay. But if it's not working for you, there are a lot of other ways to study. So as far as that goes, let's go ahead and look at the poll there. Okay, we see that the American System song, ladies and gentlemen. So Henry Clay's American System. Okay, Henry Clay's American System. We'll go ahead and get that. We'll go ahead and get that started. And let's see what we got. All right, so I wrote a song. It's to the tune of Adam Sandler's Lunch Ladyland. I don't know how many Gen Z people have heard that one, okay? But remember that Henry Clay's American System is occurring, like he's presenting it after the War of 1812, okay? So as far as that goes, Team APUSH, how about that? So going with that, all right, May 9th, there we go. So is that a slogan y'all are coming up with? Do y'all want to write that on your DBQ or something like that? I see people have seemed to have a thing here. What does that mean? I mean, I know there's like, the team and all that kind of stuff, but interesting. So somebody tell me what y'all are doing with that together, everyone achieves more. And I'll look at that after I finish this song, all right? So this is from Henry Clay's perspective. Let me make sure this thing's... All right. I'm not trying to be Mozart over here. It may not be perfect, but there we go. Woke up in the morning. Oh, wait, there we go. Woke up in the morning after a night at the saloon. Went to the House of Representatives with my pal John C. Calhoun. This embargo isn't helping us protect ourselves, but Madison finally listened. Now we're in the War of 1812. Whoa. Oops. Okay. That we weren't prepared for war as we might have been. The British burned down the White House. much to our chagrin. Well, it ended well at New Orleans. Yeah, that was quite a win. But for our economic future, we need to focus with yesterday's economy. It was based on foreign trade. If we can achieve economic independence, then we'll have it made. Y'all sing along. Internal improvements. National Bank, National Bank, National Bank. Internal improvements. National Bank. Protective tariff rights on steamy boats. Steamy boats. Steamy boats. Steamy boats. Built on Western roads. Western roads. You know, Western roads. Yes, West. Well, I dreamt one morning that I woke up to see the United States had built a national economy. Jim signed into law the second national bank supporting economic growth, and y'all have Henry Clay to thank. Internal improvements, bridges, roads, and canals to connect all the sections, gonna make us all pals. Whoops. A protective tariff to build home industry. Our economy won't have to count on British sympathy. Why cross the Atlantic, travel out of our zone when we can build factories, make stuff right here at home? Does this sound familiar to anybody? This kind of talk? I know the South's not eager. No, they're not on my side because they grow cotton to the world and they ship it far and wide. In 1828, they said that tariff's too high. John C. turned on me in Carolina nullified. But I said to Calhoun, you've got nothing to fear. Ship your cotton up north and we'll process it here. The American system is pursuing a goal to build a home economy built for free from foreign control. And brought some Stevie Boats, Stevie Boats, Stevie Boats, Stevie Boats, built on Western Road. Western roads, Western roads, West, with internal improvements, National Bank, National Bank, National Bank, internal improvements, National Bank, protective tariff rights on Stevie Boats, Stevie Boats, Stevie Boats, Stevie Boats, built on Western roads, Western roads, Western roads, Western roads, built on Western roads. All right, I'll tell you what. One day somebody's gonna do a big old super chat in the YouTube, and I'll be able to just smash my guitar at the end of it or something. But that'll another day for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, little American system, and that's on my SoundCloud. Okay, if you just type in you just Google SoundCloud Tom Richey. Yeah, if you want to hear it better, Benjamin, I recorded it and it's on my SoundCloud. Okay, thank you, Trixie and YouTube, for the kind words there. And so with that, yeah, so we've got certified yapper. The difference between Jeffersonian democracy, when Jefferson was still president, you still had that system where you had to be a property owner in order to vote. Okay, if it's glitchy, refresh. Okay, if it's glitchy, go ahead and refresh. And sometimes it gets that way. Okay, sometimes it gets that way. Go ahead and refresh your browser if it's getting glitchy. Okay, so try refreshing. Okay, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, so let's see here. Okay, so it's a bit hard to hear there. All right, do I do weddings? That's really funny. Okay, so with that, ladies and gentlemen, but that's on my SoundCloud if y'all want to hear that. So the market, actually, Danny, this is a question that we can just put in we'll put that in the Q&A, because some people might want to upvote that. Called on SoundCloud, I think it's just American System Song, but just look up by SoundCloud and you can just kind of scroll down. So with this, how important are court cases? Okay, Kristen, Marbury v. Madison and McCulloch v. Maryland. Okay, these are both very important cases, not only for APUSH, but also for APUS government and politics. Okay, so that's something that we definitely want to know these cases. Marbury v. Madison, the most important thing. Now, for AP government, you need to know the facts of the case and you need to know about the decision. For APUSH, it's largely about judicial review. Judicial review is what the Supreme Court does. Brown v. Board, for example, Plessy v. Ferguson. All of these things are examples of judicial review. Okay. So that's something where the Supreme Court examines the constitutionality of a law or executive action. Now, it's never in the Constitution. And again, I wrote a book about the thing. I never could find judicial review in the Constitution explicitly given to the judiciary. But again, John Marshall says, well, that's kind of implied. What we want to understand is that John Marshall, as a Federalist, he tended to make court decisions that upheld the power of the federal government, that strengthened the judiciary, and also things that were good for business. So McCulloch versus Maryland, we can note here that McCulloch versus Maryland, this is where the Marshall Court upholds the bank, okay, says that the bank is a constitutional implied power of the federal government and that the state of Maryland cannot tax it. Now, do we need to get into the supremacy clause and that kind of stuff you need to get into in AP US government and politics? No, okay, you don't have to do that, okay, but you do need to be able to associate Marbury v. Madison with the concept of judicial review, McCulloch versus Maryland with Marshall upholding the power of the federal government and the bank. Okay, so that, and then both of those with the Marshall Court, with the Federalist controlled Marshall Court that is there from 1801 all the way to the 1830s. Thank you, Bry and Annabelle and Are You Sure? 1738, Henry, Mariah, and Zozo, and Rowan and Clara for the recent follows on TikTok. Thank y'all very much there. And so with that, do I have any easy way to remember okay, that the thing is, Gabriel, we always think about we always want it easy. Okay. Now, the thing is that, there are some times where, history class typically came easy for me. That's why I do it for a living. Okay. But there's really no magic pill that makes this, easy, so to speak. Like studying is going to take work. Cramming takes work. Like you've got, after this, 2 more days. There are some of my students that, this is right around like baseball playoffs, softball playoffs. A lot of students are busy and you're just going to have to kind of think about. Now, one thing that I would say, limit the amount of stuff that you're trying to do. Okay. Think about what is really important. And that's one of the reasons why on these reviews. Now, when people say each president, you don't have to know every president. So watch this, okay? When we think about each president, one thing that you'll notice, we see that there is Thomas Jefferson, okay? James Madison is going to come up, in here somewhere. James Monroe, okay? And, John Quincy Adams. Do you really have to know much about John Quincy Adams? Now, the Tariff of 1828, which the controversies during Jackson's administration, but, John Quincy Adams, I think you could do fine on the exam without knowing who John Quincy Adams is. You could do fine on the exam without knowing about Martin Van Buren, the Panic of 1837, and that kind of stuff. You don't really need it. James K. Polk, associate him with westward expansion. So when you get into cram mode, what you have to think about is, okay, what is really more important? So is it really necessary to know that James Monroe was president when the Missouri Compromise happened? No, okay? It's important that you know that Henry Clay was involved and what the Missouri Compromise is. So what I'm trying to do with these 2-pagers that I've made for some of these units is really condense it to where you really get to the brass tacks. So I think that if you're trying to remember like every president and their major policies, we want to remember that not every presidency was necessarily era defining, and not every presidency, deserves to be given equal treatment on what will be a, 55 question test with stuff. Now, let me also note here, Gabriel, that a lot of times the exam, they will ask the same questions just in different ways, okay? They will ask questions in different ways. And so when we're thinking about, about that kind of stuff, we think about they're going to ask it in different ways. And so one thing that I want to note here, tomorrow night, tomorrow night I'm going to focus on Unit 5, but then we're going to break out of the main broadcast, and I'm going to be hosting another, and it's going to be another free broadcast, but it's going to be separate from this one. It's going to be a multiple choice strategy session. Now, the reason I'm doing a multiple choice strategy session, let me explain that to y'all, that I've got a free practice exam available on Albert.io. Okay, so as far as that goes, if you just type in Tom Richey free APUSH exam, gosh, you can't even spell APUSH. We've got to teach your mind. Exam Albert, okay? Or if you just put Tom Richey free practice exam. So this year I wrote a 55 question multiple choice test, and I did this. I would challenge anybody to blind taste test this, like as far as to get a group of students to take an actual AP exam and take this one and be able to say which one was not written by the College Board. Okay, that's how much I believe in it. Now, POV, that's me. Maybe I'm just trying to promote my exam, right? But then again, I've been teaching APUSH for, over 15 years now. Okay, I've been here a long time doing this thing. So we see here Tom Richey's free APUSH practice exam. Now, here's another thing that Albert.io, a website that, if we think about POV analysis for them, they're a business and they actually have practice questions. They were only going to host this if it was good. Okay, if I would have come at them, I basically wrote this thing and I thought about posting it as a PDF, but then I thought, what if Albert could host it as a digital exam? So you've got a chance to take a practice multiple choice exam completely free. Now, one thing that we want to note here is that if you should be able to log in with Google and make a free account. Okay, but as far as that goes, we want to figure in terms of, if you see something that's trying to charge you something, you pressed the wrong button somewhere. This is a completely free exam. I would invite y'all, if you're going to attend the multiple choice workshop tomorrow night, I would advise y'all to, take the exam first, okay? And this is free and open to the public. That was the thing that I wanted. I said, I've written an exam. I want any student to be able to take it, okay, without having to pay anything. I want it to be available. And Albert said, sure. I mean, they said they'd be glad to host it. And I'm really thankful that they did that. So what you can do here is you can take a free practice exam and you can figure out where your strengths and weaknesses are. So there are things like, most of the exams are going to ask you in terms of, as far as that goes, they're going to ask you, you're going to be required more than likely to know something about the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, and the English colonists, and comparing those European colonizers, that or having to look at the New England, middle, and southern colonies. So, start thinking big picture. Benjamin, I tell you what, man, little fist bump for you there. I tell you, Benjamin has done it already. Okay. So as far as that, and thank you, Gabrielle, it sounds like you shared something really useful in the chat over there. And Gabrielle actually did some, oh my goodness, how is it helpful if it's in Comic Sans? Okay, that's one thing I would say here is this is great that you put this together, but I would invite you to pick a font that is going to communicate a little bit more seriousness. That is some free advice. But thank you. As far as that goes, like I said, if you've got something that is, that is going to be helpful to people and you want to share a Google document or something like that, it's better than posting long chats. And so with that, the Second Great Awakening, okay? So the Second Great Awakening, that's something that, as far as that goes, the Second Great Awakening is something that is going to be responsible to a large extent for the antebellum reform movements, okay? And that's really how I close out the Unit 4 review guide here, okay? So when we look at the antebellum reform movements, there are two ways to contextualize, why is it all of a sudden that slavery, which has existed, from the beginning of civilization, that slavery is all of a sudden like just people are saying, let's get rid of it entirely. Now, you could go all the way back possibly to the Enlightenment in some ways. But then the Second Great Awakening, this was, the First and Second Great Awakenings were both, Protestant religious revivals that featured emotional preaching, hellfire and brimstone, turn or burn, fly or fry, bottom line. Okay. Turn or burn, fly or fry, bottom line. And so the Second Great Awakening, is basically what's set up here is that if you don't clean up your life, you're going to hell. Okay, that's pretty much the message. All right. So the Second Great Awakening has got people taking an inventory of their own lives and then also taking an inventory of the society around them. And because the thing is, well, people say, well, if you get rid of slavery, then it's going to mess up the whole economy. Well, William Lloyd Garrison, who was the father of the abolitionist movement and the publisher of the Liberator, he would say, well, it's going to kind of mess you up if you go to hell for an eternity as well. Okay, surely we can figure out how to put the economy back together. But for William Lloyd Garrison, as far as that goes, your eternal salvation is more important. With that, you can see the influence of the Second Great Awakening. When you look at, let's see, there's an edition of the Liberator. Let's see, I don't see. Okay, yeah, is it in? But basically, when you look at the Liberator, the design at the front of the paper, there is Jesus Christ right there in the middle of it. There is an enslaved person. Am I not a man or a brother? The slaveholders running away. I don't know if Jesus is waving his hand or he just pimp slapped this guy. I don't know. I mean, it's just Jesus is not happy to see this slaveholder, and this slaveholder is not happy to see Jesus. Okay. So this is something where, and then you can see out there a slave auction over here, what I presume to be the Underground Railroad. So the thing is, we want to understand that William Lloyd Garrison is getting a lot of his inspiration from the Second Great Awakening, that we need to put together a better kind of thing there. So I got to figure out this together, everyone achieves more, that kind of thing. Liani, of course, bless you. And we are, of course, thanking I tell you what, Gabriella, this looks so much more professional. Thank you. Yeah, this help. Yeah, it helps a lot. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, that's something that when we're thinking about contextualizing. Now, another way we can contextualize is with Jacksonian democracy, okay? Because Jacksonian democracy, once you tell, people kind of understood the idea that people with land and money are better than people without land and money. But once you start saying that like all white men are equal in the political community, remember that when Jefferson said all men are created equal, he meant that all men are created equal by God and that they are equal in rights. But he didn't, the Declaration of Independence is talking about natural rights. It's not talking about the law. And so when we're looking at something like that, we want to consider, and let me go in here. So we've got abolitionism, temperance, okay? The idea that, now, of course, the average American in 1840, drank like 3 times as much as the average American drinks today. It was a problem. And there's nobody that ever says like, hey, I quit drinking and I tell you what, I've lost 10 pounds. I'm doing better at work and I stopped knocking around my wife and kids. Okay. Nobody ever says that. And so as far as that goes, alcohol is not something that's very good. And so abolitionism, temperance, those are the heavy hitters. And a lot of women took part in the abolitionist and temperance movements, including people like Lucretia Mott. Now, Lucretia Mott was a Quaker. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they were, they were the biggest figures at the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. And they had participated in the abolitionist movement and the temperance movement. And so the Seneca Falls Convention is really the culmination in 1848. This is era defining. Now, remember, 1848, just like 1803, it's a 2-for-1 year. 1803, Louisiana Purchase, Marbury v. Madison, 2-for-1. 1848, Seneca Falls Convention, then the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And if you've never seen that Jimmy Fallon Gadsden Purchase, look at that once we're finished here. It's really funny. And some classes watch it, some don't. But 1848 Seneca Falls Convention, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Somebody also noted that, even though I mentioned the gold rush is not necessarily a major topic, watch it be the DBQ, but the gold rush is in 1848. And of course, it takes so long to get there back then that a lot of people didn't go till 1849. But it was 1848 where we saw the gold rush. So the Seneca Falls Declaration, if we're thinking about Jacksonian democracy, this idea that Jacksonian democracy, which, we're going into this democracy where, unpropertied and illiterate white men can vote, and it's not a big deal. Well, people like Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they're not happy about this. When we look at the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments, what we can see here is that they say, because these are upper middle class women, these are women of means who've been educated according to the dictates of Republican motherhood, that they've received good educations. And yet Jacksonian democracy says that, even if you're unlettered and unproperty, you can vote. And so, the women say here about the men, he has withheld from her rights which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both natives and foreigners. So note here, you see a little nativism in there as well. Now, natives, they're talking about people who are living here, right? But the idea that somebody can immigrate from Ireland, and they can live here a few years and they can be naturalized, and this Irishman can vote, and yet a natural born upper middle class woman can't vote. Now, another thing we note that comes up in the course and exam description is that the 15th Amendment was controversial within the feminist movement. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who had a big hand in drafting the Seneca Falls Declaration of Sentiments, also had a lot of choice words for the idea of black men being able to vote before white women were able to vote. Remember, she said that it should all be one amendment, that together. And Frederick Douglass, who was actually present at the Seneca Falls Convention, he says, well, if I insist on women being included, Frederick Douglass was a backer of women's suffrage, but he said, if I insist that women be included, it's not going to pass, and none of us will vote. So Frederick Douglass supported the 15th Amendment, not because he didn't believe in women's suffrage, but because he was being pragmatic. And so with that, we see here that, he has made her, if married, in the eye of the law, civilly dead. He has taken from her all right in property, even into the wages she earns. So, you note in the Lowell Mills, mostly young unmarried women. But if somebody was married, her husband would have the right to her wages back then. She couldn't have her own bank account. So that's something here that is, it's a very fascinating document, and it's worded very angrily, much like the Declaration of Independence. Danny, wrong period. Okay, Pancho Villa, again, not necessarily somebody I've ever seen on the APUSH exam, but Pancho Villa is doing his thing during Woodrow Wilson's presidency. Woodrow Wilson sends an expedition into Mexico against Pancho Villa somewhere in the 19-teens. All right. So as far as that, yeah, Trisha, I think that it is noteworthy, like seeing like the women's suffrage movement being motivated by the idea that these upper middle class women, they do see themselves as superior to uneducated white men and recently freed black men. They believe that they are better educated and better qualified and more deserving to vote. And so with that, let me go ahead and see what we've got in the Q&A. So as far as that goes, now where it's getting the point beyond the document, what are we talking about for taking the last point on a DBQ? Okay, John, this is an oddly worded question, okay? So as far as that goes, it's an oddly worded question. Now, one thing that I always say, if this is about the complex understanding point, one thing that we need to really understand is, first of all, you can make a 5 on the exam without getting the complex understanding point on either the DBQ or the LEQ. Okay, I'm just going to say I don't really get what this question is asking, but you can get that point, and so people obsess over it, but you can get that point without it. Henry Clay's American System, Aaron, yes, that's why I wrote a whole song about it. All right, yeah, remember, we can nip it. National Bank, internal improvements, protective tariff. Now, also, Aaron, my next TikTok, I actually filmed it while I was at school today. And, but I haven't been able to edit and post it yet. So I do plan on posting that later tonight where I explain Henry Clay's American System. Should I put that song on the TikToks as well? What do y'all think? I'm just kind of trying to learn about the TikToks. It's interesting. So Sam White, Alex, Queen, emoji, that's a wrap. Big Rim _78 Duck. And let's see. Hada MS07. Okay, so as far as that goes, thank y'all so much for those of you who have given me recent follows on the TikToks. All right, so with that, what I'm going to say here, over the weekend, I did a premium stream that was attended by APUSH teachers. And that is, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this in the chat. If you want to buy into it, if you really want to score everything on the DBQ, I'm not going to be able to give you a hack. And when it comes down to it, if you're asking about the DBQ with 2 days left on the exam, you've had all year. Okay, so here would be my strategy. Okay, that I would want to make sure whatever points I'm earning already, that I make sure that I'm earning those points. Okay, easiest points to earn on the DBQ: thesis, describes 3 documents, and some sort of outside evidence, because there are always huge gaps. Now, here is the premium DBQ workshop. Okay, so as far as that goes, this was, this is just a $10 ticket. And this basically, it's an hour and a half. Okay. Plus, I've got this DBQ that I wrote, and I've got 10 sample essays that you have access to. So it's a DBQ that I wrote, 10 sample essays, a very detailed, view of the documents, like very going into big detail on the documents, and going into ways to score every single point. Let me see what was the length of this thing. Let me just note here, it was an hour and 37 minutes. Okay, so it's an hour and 37-minute workshop. If you're serious about the DBQ, I would definitely say that you might want to consider that. Here's the other thing. If you buy in, there's also a link to a version of the broadcast where you can share it with your classmates. So if you purchase it for $10, as long as you don't post the link on that YouTube co-stream link, fine. Share it with your classmates. Fine with me, okay? Just don't post the link anywhere publicly. That's all I ask, okay? So the APUSH DBQ Premium session, okay, so that's available there for those of you on YouTube. So again, now, if you're not willing to spend more than an hour learning how to do the DBQ, then I would just try to study content and get my multiple choice score up, because writing a DBQ, it's an art form that takes a lot of time. Okay, so that's one of those things that I think is is important. And also, thank you very much, Nathan. Yeah, I've got the rubric, and again, there are some points that are easier to earn than others. The average student makes about a 3.6 on the DBQ. So when you're obsessing over every little point, if you make a 3 or a 4, if you make a 4 on the DBQ and you don't pass the exam, you'll never know what you made on the DBQ because you'll just get the number. But if you make a 4 on the DBQ and you don't pass the exam, the DBQ will not be the reason why you didn't pass. So that's one thing that I always want to tell people. But if you're trying to make a 5 on the exam and you still don't know how to write a DBQ, it's like that premium workshop would be a lot better than me pretending to have some kind of easy solution for you. So with that, Danny, Danny, did some of y'all take AP Euro? It's probably the case that some of y'all took AP Euro. And when you learned about the first industrial revolution, like the spinning jenny, the water frame, the market revolution is basically what we call the first industrial revolution in U.S. history. I say that as someone who teaches both AP Euro and APUSH, that in AP Euro, I call this development the first industrial revolution. In APUSH, I call it the market revolution. Okay, so that song, about the American system, That's kind of part of this market revolution that we see a push toward manufacturing. But again, things with like the cotton gin, okay? It's not the Bessemer process that comes along later. The cotton gin, you're actually having to turn a crank, okay? So it's like you get machine power, but you're still using your hands, okay? The steel plow, you still got to go out there and you got to plow that field, So that's something that we want to kind of think about there. But yeah, basically the market revolution, if you took AP Euro last year and you learned about the first industrial revolution, it's the same thing. Oh my goodness, Lexi. I tell you, your audience, Lexi. You are talking to a South Carolinian. And I'm going to tell you what, the only reason that I haven't put this lecture online, and I haven't posted a lot of lectures in recent years, but I am planning on changing that soon. I know it doesn't help y'all that much, but as far as that goes, that I wrote my last senior paper in college on the nullification crisis. And the reason I haven't gotten up there yet, because it's probably going to end up being a multi-part lecture because it goes so, but I don't think you want to take the kind of deep dive that I can take you on. But let's go ahead and chat about it a little bit, okay? Because actually there is no topic in this unit that I find more interesting than the nullification crisis. So as far as that goes, well, here's the thing, Alexander, that during the first industrial revolution, you are moving from that subsistence farming economy to a capitalist economy. Okay. So the thing is, I wouldn't get part of what I'm saying here. I wouldn't get too technical. It's the APUSH exam. You're not writing like a doctoral thesis or turning in a 20-page paper for your master's or something like that. So just keep that in mind that, when we think about the market revolution, like I said on the song, steamy boats, okay, steamboats, Western building roads, bridges, canals, the Erie Canal, John Deere inventing the steel plow, the cotton gin, which is turning cotton agriculture into a business. Okay, it's like the beginning of agribusiness. And then, and then things like the telegraph, that kind of thing. So yeah, just don't get too technical. Think about kind of what comes to mind. A lot of this exam is word associations. Okay, market revolution, steamboats, steel plow. Then what do you call it? The American system. These are things that we kind of associate and put in a box together. So somebody owes you a public apology. Oh my goodness! Next thing, we're gonna have Preston Brooks in here. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and talk about the as far as that goes. Trisha, I'm getting teacher vibes from you. I appreciate you being here and and chatting with us and being part of this. It always honors me when teachers actually show up. I'm honored when teachers just share the link with their students, but when they show up, like, great. So the nullification crisis is a conflict between South Carolina and the federal government over the tariff of 1828. And so we get a lot, this is one of the most important events in this period. But again, for APUSH, you don't necessarily go too deep into it. Now, if we're looking for context, if we want to contextualize the nullification crisis, then we would start with Henry Clay's American system, okay? National Bank, internal improvements, protective tariff. This is a Hamiltonian plan. Now, Henry Clay is the economic heir of Hamilton. Okay, so we want to understand that Henry Clay's American system, again, it's a creature of the War of 1812. And so when we look at this, Henry Clay imagines a United States where we got a national bank that provides capital for manufacturing, that cash crops are sent up to the Northeast for manufacturing, and then they'll be sent back down there as clothing to buy, that we develop the West economically, that the Northwest, has staple crops. Remember the Northwest, John Deere. Don't think about manufacturing as being a northern thing. There's not a whole lot of manufacturing in Indiana, in Illinois, and Ohio before the Civil War. And so the goals, again, self-sufficiency, internal trade, development of Western lands. Jefferson, before the War of 1812, Jefferson wanted an economy in the United States. He said, look, Europe's, factories are filthy and dirty. We don't want their factories. We don't want their cities. We want a pure agrarian republic. Now, Jefferson's idea for an economy, though, when the War of 1812, the Napoleonic Wars that led to the War of 1812, when Europeans start killing each other, all of a sudden we can't count on that trade to work, and we found ourselves in a pickle. And so, as far as that goes, that Henry Clay said the country as a whole benefits, that the American system promotes the general welfare, so to speak. Well, the South's not really buying it because remember, cotton agriculture was the most profitable sector of the economy at this time. And so, and this was basically a lot of these, Southern farmers, those of you who took AP Euro, y'all know that after the Napoleonic Wars, Europe doesn't really erupt into another continental war for almost a century. And so when we think about this, that the South by the late 1820s is going back into trading with Europe. And so, but in the meantime, the American system's coming around, which this is an anti-American system cartoon. And what we see here is that these monkeys, they call it the monkey system. And basically, when you look at the monkeys, they're wanting to eat out of the troughs of other monkeys. And Henry Clay is looking like a carnival operator here. Come look at my grand original American system. And so the thing is, the South is not buying it because what they believe is that this economy Henry Clay wants to build, this manufacturing economy, this development in the West, that Southern planters, they believe that, look, the Southern states' economies are going to be financing this when their economies are already doing fine. And so the tariff of 1828, which the South calls the Tariff of Abominations, it was passed in 1828. That's why it's called that. And it was the highest tariff ever passed by Congress. So we see here, now one thing we want to note that we can look here is you see the high tariffs during the Gilded Age. You see the tariffs go down considerably during the Progressive Era when the income tax is passed under Woodrow Wilson. Then you see it go up under the Republicans, the pro-business Republicans in the 1920s, but still not as high as it was during the Gilded Age. Now, Herbert Hoover, that was a dumb thing to do. Okay, that was a really dumb thing to do, is signing the Hawley-Smoot tariff. But not even Herbert Hoover's disastrous Hawley-Smoot tariff was as high as the Tariff of Abominations. And so basically, the Tariff of 1828 was a protective tariff. Now, when you look at Southern planters in the early 1800s, also the populists in the 1890s, they want a revenue tariff. They think protective tariffs in the 1800s hurt farmers. So a revenue tariff is a modest tariff to help the federal government collect tax revenue, whereas a protective tariff is a high tariff to protect American industry from foreign competition. And when you think about the sectors of the economy, they were divided into commerce, agriculture, and manufacturing. Now, out of those three industries, only manufacturing benefited from the protective tariff. And Henry Clay says, well, you know what? If we can build a home economy, it's going to be great. You see here where certain sections of the country are voting for it, but you notice the South voting against it 50-3. New England kind of split there because New England, remember at the time, still had a pretty big commercial economy too. One thing that I saw the other day, a lot of New England senators voted against the getting rid of the slave trade in 1808 because New England was still making a bunch of money off of it. And so with that, John C. Calhoun, who was vice president of the United States, he was from South Carolina, he decides that he's going to make a case for the tariff being unconstitutional. Now, I need to refine my, the argument here a little bit before I fit. This is an unfinished lecture, plenty for APUSH and more. But Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the powers of Congress, it doesn't give Congress the power to tax unconditionally. There are limits there. So it says that to pay the debts and provide, it's a comma, okay, which means that there will be some kind of limitation on this power. And so in order to tax, it's got to pay the debts, provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Now, with that, common defense and general welfare, not common defense or general welfare. So the thing is, by this time, about half the debt from the War of 1812 had been paid. So the United States had a national debt, but not like something that, warranted an emergency tariff like this. And so the question is that this was going to hurt South Carolina's economy and the economy of southern states in general. And so the question is, what if Congress, passes something that negatively affects a state? And if the state believes that, this is marginally or just not even authorized by the Constitution. So South Carolina had the option to acquiesce, they could secede, or they could nullify. So one thing we want to note here is what Calhoun's doing with nullification. He's actually kind of trying to tread a middle path here. He's trying to say that, this is something that this is an alternative to secession. And thank you, Russell Katya and Adeline Miller. Thank y'all for the recent Instagram follows. So with that, the doctrine of nullification is the doctrine that a state can unilaterally refuse to enforce federal legislation that it says is unconstitutional. Now, Calhoun didn't make this up. He's actually dusting off Jefferson's Kentucky resolutions, that Jefferson said that the Alien and Sedition Acts are unconstitutional. Now, Jefferson was also the vice president of the United States at the time, which is very interesting. And so the Kentucky resolution said that basically that a state is not like, that the states are not in a position of unconditional submission to the federal government. And so Calhoun writes the South Carolina exposition and protest. So with that, he basically says, look, the South represents 2/3 of national exports and just over 1/3 of the population. So when you do this math, and I'm not a mathematician, but the South will end up paying a lot more of this tariff. And another thing that we see is the Constitution says that taxes have to be equal across the United States. So with that, Calhoun comes up with with the doctrine of nullification, which is, I'm not going to go into all the things there. So the Hayne-Webster debates. Now, Daniel Webster, who we hear from in other contexts, Daniel Webster was against nullification, and then Robert Hayne was pro-nullification. Now, I always like to mention our national motto there, e pluribus unum, out of many one. Hayne is arguing for the compact theory of the Constitution that says more the pluribus, right? More the plural. And he says the Constitution is a compact between sovereign states. And then Webster makes the argument that the Constitution creates a national union. Now, this is a case where Webster's argument was a little bit ahead of its time, but it very much resembles the argument that Abraham Lincoln will make when he opposes secession and when he says secession is illegal. This idea that we the people means we the people, okay? Not necessarily the states, that we have a national union. Now, the founding generation probably would have had a hard time swallowing that idea. Now, Hamilton would have loved it, but a lot of the founding fathers probably would not have been too crazy about it. And so, Webster, says that, look, that we need to have, a strong union. And Webster, even though, again, the ideas are a little bit ahead of its time, but a rhetorical victory. Now, Jackson was a big states' rights guy. And he's put in a weird position because remember when Jackson vetoed the Bank of the United States and he vetoed the Maysville Road, he said that, look, federal authority, we've got to consider federal authority. We got to consider states' rights. Now, with that, while I'm talking about Jackson, I've been explaining this for a little while, that as far as that goes, can the mod, who do we need to ban? Do I need to ban someone in the chat? I'll be, as far as that goes, what have we got here? Who do we need to, y'all just let me know. Who am I looking? Yeah, that South Carolina nearly seceded. Okay. So as far as that goes, if there's somebody, y'all just be quick about it because I'm going to be looking at the chat for just a little bit. I'd be glad to kick somebody if they're being inappropriate. Who is it? Who do I need to do a find and get them out of here. Otherwise, y'all are just going to have to ignore them. So with that, I feel like, you know what, I want to wrap. I want to do the wig party free. So we're just going to we're going to get that going while we're talking about Andrew Jackson. We're kind of out of time, Mallory. Unfortunately, these units are very big. So when I stop talking about nullification, probably going to be wrapping this up for tonight. But you know, we still, Thursday will be open season. So tomorrow will be the Civil War and Reconstruction in the 1850s and all that. But Thursday, any topic that is trending is going to be is going to be acceptable. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and note that. So with that, there it is. All right. So where is that? Yeah, I think I had to put that up there. Let's see. Okay, there it is. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, and remember, it's on the TikToks and on my SoundCloud. It's basically everywhere I am, I think, the Wig Party Free. All right. So, Andrew Jackson, Wig Party Free, meaning he's free of the Wig Party. Okay. Oh, I'm WHIG Wig Party Free. That means I ain't got to worry about you, DIN-RE. I got the VETO pen in my hand, and I'm using it to ratchet legislation. I'm WHIG Wig Party Free. That means I ain't got to worry about you, DIN-RE. I got the SBOILs in my hand, and I'm giving all the jobs to all my Democrat friends. Veto. Veto. Got to kill the bank before it kills me. Veto. Veto. Gotta kill the bank before it kills. Wigs, I'm old Hickory, the New Orleans hero. You can catch me stopping traffic on the Maysville Road. More power to the common man. Democracy's the goal. Said I lost in 24. Not Henry Clay's goal. I'd be cutting off them bank lights, standing up for states' rights. The cartoonists call me like a king. That's here, right? So in the winter, in the summer, pin out every night. Put that U.S. bank to sleep better. Good night. To the victor go the spoils as they should. Try and override me, wishing that a wig would. I don't want your paper money. Species still good. Gotta kill the bank before it kills. I'm WHIG Wig Party Free. That means I ain't gotta worry about you. DIN-RE. I got my VETO pen in my hand, and I'm using it to erect legislation. I'm WHIG Wig Party Free. That means I ain't gotta worry about you. DIN-RE. I got the SBOILs in my hand, and I'm giving all the jobs to all my Democrat friends. Veto. Kill the bank lights. How you like them states' rights? Kill the bank lights. How you like them states' rights? Kill the bank lights. How you like them states' rights? Kill the bank lights. Oh, Sean T says, bro, what's this? All right. That's to the tune of FNF by Glorilla, and we'll just. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, remember, Wig Party Free. He's free of the Whig Party after being reelected in 1832. Okay, so as far as that goes, so going from there, ladies and gentlemen, we've established Jackson was a friend of states' rights. Thank you so much, Denise. Thank you so much. So with that, Jackson's a big states' rights guy. So why did he oppose nullification? Now we need to understand how Jackson understood the concept of states' rights and how that compares with Calhoun's understanding. That Jackson, when he thinks states' rights, he thinks in terms of that the federal government stays away from the reserve powers of the states. Okay. So basically, when he vetoes the bank, Jackson says that I demanded that if the bank were going to be rechartered, it needed to be clear that the states retain the right to tax business profits. And so that Jackson said the federal government does not need to infringe upon the rights of the states. But Jackson sees it really kind of one side or the other. Nullification, he says, that collecting tariffs is a federal power, and the states don't have a right to do that. So then you've got you got John C. Calhoun, who believed that states' rights to him is protecting the states from the federal government overstepping its authority. And so that's where, even though both these guys claim to be for states' rights meant something else to both of them. So basically, Jackson gives a, South Carolina in their ordinance of nullification, they said that we are going to nullify the tariffs of 1828 and 1832. And if the federal government comes in with force and tries to collect it, we will basically consider ourselves seceded from the Union. And Jackson issued his proclamation where he said, look, this is, the strange position that any one state may not only declare an act of Congress void, but the true construction of that instrument permits a state to retain its place in the Union and be bound by no other of its laws other than those it may choose to consider as constitutional. Nullification has, some interesting kind of things to it. But then Jackson is saying, look, I mean, what if every state's just going to decide what's constitutional and what's not? So Congress passes the Force Bill, which in 1833, which authorizes Andrew Jackson to use force to collect the tariff. But although Jackson claimed he's going to go into South Carolina, hang the first man he can lay his hands on upon the first tree he can reach, Henry Clay, Missouri Compromise, Nullification, Missouri Compromise of 1850, but the one that gets forgotten is Henry Clay's actually responsible for 3 compromises that Henry Clay put through the compromise tariff of 1833, which basically said that over the next 10 years, tariffs will be incrementally lowered every year until they reach revenue levels, okay? And they make a deal. And so South Carolina accepts the compromise tariff, but then to be a little bit petty, they nullify the Force Bill. And so, crisis averted. But then remember, Henry Clay, the American system, National Bank Internal Improvements Protective Tariff, but he's also known as the Great Compromiser. Okay, so the Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Nullification Compromise of 1833, and the Compromise of 1850. Now, remember, I've got video lectures on YouTube on the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850. Also, as an added bonus, I've got a rap on both of them. Actually, the Compromise of 1850 rap is on my channel. How many of y'all know Mr. Betts' class? Okay, how many of y'all, have watched Mr. Betts' class? Let me see how many people are still watching those. I tell you what, the 20 teens were a great time to be on YouTube. Do you watch Mr. Betts' class music videos? Okay, he doesn't do them anymore. I don't think he's done one in some years. He's kind of gone on like animation and stuff like that. But let me see how many of y'all have watched Mr. Betts' class and his his music videos. So as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, I hope Levi that you are happy with that one. Okay, because again, nullification is one of my favorite topics to go into in U.S. history. So say we need to know. Okay, so basically what Kendall's wanting me to do here is to say 5 to 10 proper nouns. Like basically somebody says APUSH Unit 4. What are the first things that come to mind? Okay, Izzy, Emma, 2007, Lizzie, Hi, Scarlett, J Biz, Olivia, not going to say that, Sturafel, Yaya, and Sebastian. Actually, that's not the question. Those were 10 people who recently followed me on TikTok. Okay, so the first 5 to 10 proper nouns: Louisiana Purchase, Missouri Compromise, abolitionism, Jackson's bank veto, the War of 1812, the American system, the Monroe Doctrine. Tell me if I say something accidental twice. The Market Revolution. Oh, this cursido grabbed me. The Embargo Act of 1807. Okay, now I've got one more. Better use that carefully. Women's rights, Seneca Falls Convention. Okay, so as far as that goes, if I just had to say top 10. Now, if somebody were to do that, Kendall, if I were to make like a top 10 or something like that, would that be something you'd be interested in? So I'm cooked. Liani, I'm kind of cooked too. But you know what, Liani, you are going to cook on Friday morning. I can tell you that. Okay, so wow. So yeah, some of y'all have seen some of y'all seen Mr. Betts' class and all that stuff. But yeah, I'll tell you what, like it's it's something. Yeah, YouTube, if you don't stick around, because again, I haven't made static content in some years, but again, I'm kind of getting ready to do that. But we're first just having a little fun and getting that started here. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, do y'all want any shout outs or anything like that? We're about to wrap this up. Wait, what? Mr. Betts' class is in the chat? Like, is he actually there? Like, is this actually Mr. Betts' class? Like, I mentioned Mr. Betts' class and he came in there. Like, how did that happen? Like, how did that actually happen? Like, dude, we just mentioned you. Okay, so so wow, did y'all see that in the YouTube chat? Mr. Betts' class was over there, and we mentioned him, and there we go. So with that, and so with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and let's see, anyone from HCHS. Thank you, Yvonne. The force is with all students for AP. That's right, and that's a teacher saying that during Teacher Appreciation Week, ladies and gentlemen. And so when a teacher says something on Teacher Appreciation Week, it's true. Okay. So as far as that, Mr. McQuenston from the class from Kofi. Okay, Kofi, we got that. Anybody else? I know it's like I summoned Mr. Betts. All right. So as fun as that is, let's see. I'm going to let's see. Betts, man. So with this, we'll go ahead and do that. Let's see. Let me see here. Oh, oops. Yeah. Oh, oops. Okay, but I gotta let him know. I'll text him in a little bit. God bless you too, Aria. And so with that, she was saying that to me. Hey Shayan. Hey Shayan. All right, happy Teacher Appreciation Week to you too, Julia. Whether you're a teacher or a student. So we've got here your friends, Angela's friends, Kayla and Bella, as well as your APUSH teacher, Mrs. Hester from South Garner High. Okay, shout out, ladies and gentlemen. We want to shout out to Mr. Kavanaugh. Levi is back from yesterday. Thank you, Aphrodite. I'm so glad that that's happening there. And let's see, your teacher, let's see, current teacher, Mr. Miller from ELCO. Let's see, and then Mr. Beecher we've got as well, and Miss O'Shea from Dwight Morrow. Okay. Oh, Dwight Morrow. Interesting. He was Charles Lindbergh's father-in-law. Let's see, Mr. Uhlman and Mr. Brown from East Troy High School. Mr. Uhlman is from Fort Hamilton. Mrs. Melton from Health Careers High School. Miss Thrackrar from Ann Richards School for the Young Women Leaders. All right. Mr. Davis's class from Roslyn. Shout out to Mr. O'Neill, okay, from Mount St. Charles. Thank you, Mr. O'Neill, for sharing my link with your students, okay? So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be back tomorrow at 8. Now it's going to go to about 8:50, 8:55 because we're going to do a multiple choice strategy session, and that's going to be a free thing. Now remember, those of you who are asking about the DBQ, I would strongly consider, if you're in a position where you're really clueless about the DBQ and you need to know what's going on, I would consider possibly buying into that $10 session where, again, that's like, over an hour and a half of me explaining it. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate y'all coming in. I might get on the TikToks tonight and do another live. We'll see. Maybe not. But we'll be back tomorrow, and that'll be Unit 5, Manifest Destiny, 1850s, Civil War and Reconstruction. Ladies and gentlemen, it is always a pleasure.